Right, so welcome everyone to our final week of the Allen MEL and the final week of the course. It's been a very long journey, but we've finally made it, so congratulations. We are going to be recording the session today for those who cannot make it, and just a reminder that it's only going to record the plenary and not the breakout groups. I mentioned last week that Leanne's last session was last week, but this week joining us today we have Karina Calzoni, who is the Managing Director of Clear Horizon. Welcome, Karina. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll just have a quick couple of seconds. I think I did meet this group at one session earlier on in this process. So just to say hi, if you're joining and I haven't said hello before, yeah, looking forward to doing the last session of the, how long has this one been? 12 weeks?
16
weeks, yeah.
Yeah, since I think
well done
February
getting
started.
This
Yeah. Thanks, Karina. So just a bit of an agenda for today. So Karina is going to do a quick recap of this week's online content in terms of a learning culture and engaging in MEL in an organisation. We're then going to go into breakout groups to have a bit of a think about the enablers and constraints of a learning culture in your own organisations, before then coming back and having a big reflection on the last 16 weeks of the course. So that's how we're going to run today. While Karina is chatting and presenting, feel free to pop any questions into the chat box, and I'll make sure that they're answered either along the way or at the end of the presentation as well. So Karina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I'll just get my screen set up so I can share it. It's sharing?
Not yet.
Isn't it? Oh, it's because I haven't pressed share. Right, now it is, and I'll press slideshow. No. Okay, great. Everyone can see them? Excellent.
Thanks.
So, yeah, this is sort of the, this is the last week of the full MEL course. So you would have learned a lot about how we develop up and plan a MEL framework and how we get people involved, and we do our theory of change, and then we're thinking about how we can put information in different ways, like present data, that sort of thing. But this session is really about how we can make sure that all of that work that we've done up until this date is something that is used. So that's really the focus for this session, is how can we maximise the use of everything that we've done in MEL today. And it's a really important part, because you've put all that work into getting your MEL framework built, and then you'll be implementing it. And if it's not used at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like you've been able to add a lot of value. So before we sort of think about what we can do, what actions we can make, let's just think about what constraints and enablers would be for a learning culture in an organisation. So, I'm sort of thinking this might be like a bit of a checklist for seeing how you felt that your organisation would be ready for MEL. So one thing is you'd be thinking about how staff buy in. So who needs to buy in? Who needs to be part of the MEL process? And the staff are ready to buy in. They've already understood what it is and they're ready to go. So if you've got a lot of buy-in for MEL, that's great. Another thing that you might want to look at across your organisation is a bit of a checklist to see how you're going for a learning culture, is thinking about, is the culture in your organisation an open culture where it's okay to talk about failure? When we're doing measurement, evaluation and learning, I mean, the learning part, a lot of learning comes from failure, and failure is not a bad thing. And so you want to have a culture where you explain what went wrong, and you can even put it into more positive terms than failure and say, well, what are the things that we learnt that we could do differently next time that didn't go so well or didn't go how we expected? So just having that culture, that open culture that is okay about talking about things that didn't go well, is a really good mark of a learning organisation. Another part to that is that the staff have the capacity to do MEL. They understand what it is. They may not know how to do all the bits and pieces of it, but they understand it and they value it, and they have the capacity to engage in MEL in some way. Another thing that would be really important is that senior managers, they buy in and they authorise any changes. So, you know, we're talking about being an open organisation about learning, about things that didn't go so well. We also want an organisation that goes, okay, so we need to adapt because of changing context and changing needs. And so a really successful project is one that is able to adapt and recognising that and using MEL information in that decision. So, yeah, just having senior managers on side and buying into that kind of thinking. And having structures and systems in place that systematise evaluation and learning. That's really important. So it doesn't happen over here and over here. There's an understanding and it's all linked, and there's a process for making sure that there's evaluation and learning that happens in the organisation. And another thing is that you consider the boundaries about who is represented. So people are asking questions when they're looking at the data and they're saying, yeah, I can see that these people are engaged, but I can see that there's a group that's not represented in the data. So just being open and thinking about the boundaries about who is actually represented and who's not. So that's what a great learning organisation would look like. Now, how do we get there? So there's different things that we can think about to maximise our engagement in MEL. So these are some strategies that you could apply. So you could, during the MEL planning, you could engage the executives around the budget and developing of the key evaluation questions. The budget is an interesting question because a lot of times I've been asked, how much should the budget be for MEL? And, you know, various ways of coming up with that figure have been sort of thrown around, like 15%, 10%, $15,000. It's kind of a bit of an art to know exactly how much money to spend in for MEL. But if having the key executives engaged in the process and understanding that a budget is required and working with you to come up with a reasonable budget is a really good way to engage people in MEL. Another way to do this is to, during the MEL planning, is to engage the key program staff and the stakeholders in clarifying the theory of change. And I'm sure you sort of started to talk about that when you were doing your theory of change part of the course. And understanding the thing that you're evaluating is a really important part of the engagement process. So I would, recommend involving as many people as you can, the key people, in that development of the theory of change, and you'll get buy-in in the rest of the MEL. Also, if you can't involve people in building the theory of change, you can engage people in interrogating the theory of change, the logic. So they're thinking about, does it make sense? Do I understand it? Can I see how change is expected to happen? So just getting people involved in that process is sometimes for some stakeholders that might be more appropriate, and other stakeholders, they might just not have the time to be involved in the development of it, and engaging them, interrogating is just as valuable. And then also engaging staff and stakeholders in collecting data. And sometimes projects feel that engaging the staff and the stakeholders in collecting the data is a bit, adds bias, and it can, but there's lots of ways that you can still involve people in collecting data that is, you're not worried too much about bias, but it's the driver is that they'll be engaged in the MEL process, and that they'll be much more open to reflecting on making meaning about the findings. And the last stage, which we've found time and time again is probably one of the key points that really gets the MEL findings used, is engaging people in a reflection workshop. So at the end, or maybe annually, you have a session where you bring all the data together, you make sense of the data together, and you make final recommendations together. And getting people involved in that part of the process is much more likely for them to use the evaluation in some way. whether it's directly for the project or it might be something that is outside the project, but is still the lessons learnt from your project might extend beyond just you. So they're sort of suggestions that we make in ways to maximise the use of MEL. So one way that you can think about how you actually make the best of MEL and influence, where do you influence, is to actually think about at what points do you influence, and what are the questions that you would need to ask in thinking about where you might put your effort into engaging people in the different phases of MEL. So these questions could be things like who needs what information and in what form, and that will help you think about, well, who needs to be engaged in that process. I might need to go and talk to the audience about the evaluation and engage at that point. You might thinking about which leaders need to be engaged to ensure that there is buy-in. So there might be a few key people, champions in the leadership team, or just leaders that you know that if they can talk about your program and your MEL framework positively, that will rub off on others and build some buy-in that way. You might think about, do we need a summary of the MEL plan for the key people so that they can actually understand it more quickly than having to read through the whole thing? They can understand the key messages of MEL. You might think about how we will involve different people at different stages in the rollout. Like I was saying in the last slide, like I was saying this slide, you've got different phases that you can involve people in MEL, and you might say that some stakeholders need to be involved in designing up front, other stakeholders need to be involved in the reflections, workshop and development of recommendations. So you need to just think about who needs to be involved in what process. And then also thinking about who should be involved in the reflective exercise. So that's that last part of the session, last part of the process of MEL. And then another really key sort of question to think through is who should be the people that are making the judgments around your key evaluation questions. So is it somebody externally coming in to make that judgment? Is it the team that's implementing the project? Is there some outside body? Is it going to be management? Just really thinking through who should make judgments. And they will all help you to think about at what point do you need to engage different stakeholders in the MEL process. So they're just a good checklist of questions to help you think through where and when to involve different people. This table we've used a bit to just help us to think about the type of involvement that we might have at the different phases or different types of MEL where we want to end up, and different phases of MEL. So this is come from an organisation called IAP2, and it's an engagement framework, and it talks about different promises of engagement. So the first column is called inform, and this is when we're saying, okay, so the objective of informing people is about providing the information for people. You're providing it in a transparent way. You're making sure that they are informed, but you're not actually involving them in any of the decisions. So you're just informing them, but you're informing them in a way that they can make sense of the information and do something with it for themselves. But there's no expectation that they will influence the program or the MEL in any way. So the promise that you make when you're doing this idea, this part of engagement, is that you will keep them informed about the evaluation planning and the findings and the recommendations. So that's the promise that you make in MEL to when you're thinking about these stakeholders need to be informed. And the way that you might do that is you might use social media tools such as blogs, Twitter, fact sheets, websites. You might have meetings, you might have presentations. And I think if you remember back to when you talked about the audience and the primary and the secondary audience, often the secondary audience are the ones that we want to keep informed. They're not involved. So we don't design things around them. They're not telling us what they want and we're responding to that. We are just keeping them informed about the evaluation and the MEL. So then the next level up, so if you think about this as a continuum, the next part of the continuum is involve. So this is when we look at, we work with stakeholders, so we want to involve them in the process of MEL. They might be designing parts of MEL, they might be involved in the theory of change development, they might, we might be thinking about what are the key evaluation questions that they're going to be needing the answers for, and we build that into the overall key evaluation questions for the MEL. So we involve, and the promise that we make when we're doing this is that we will work with you to ensure that your views are considered and responded to, and your recommendations and comments are heard. And we require that you build this. Where required, we will build in the capacity so that you can be involved in a meaningful way. And how do you do this? You might do co-design processes and workshops and things like that. Then you move up to the next level on the continuum and you move into collaboration. And this is where we work really closely with partners. We're actually partners in the process. You don't have the evaluator and the program deliverers. You're working together, and you might be working on a project with a number of different partners in an equal way. And what we're doing is that we're working with our partners and our community members through various aspects of the evaluation planning and the data collection process. And the promise that we make is that we will work with you directly for direct advice and development of MEL implementation. So it's almost seamless. You know, not one person is leading, you're both together and you're both doing it in a collaborative way. And then the next part along the continuum is ownership, and that's where it's community-led, and the MEL implementers would pretty much be led by the community. And so you're walking alongside or behind even the people that are implementing the MEL and the program. So yeah, it's much more community driven and much less, I suppose, program driven and government driven. And in most cases, your collaboration, your involvement in the MEL process would probably be where most organisations would make promises to the community and stakeholders. So you're involving them, not necessarily keeping them, not necessarily collaborating. Okay, so I'll just got one more slide and then we'll open it up for any questions. So this is your documentation, the MEL framework plan that you have. These are the types of questions that we've sort of thought would be useful for you to think through about strategic learning and improvement in your plan. So what you can do is you can think about the engagement in building your plan. So that's thinking about who's in the process, what needs to happen in that process, and how you will revise it. So you're sort of asking questions around the MEL build. And then you move into, okay, now we're going to implement the MEL, and you're thinking about the short cycles of learning adaptation, and you're thinking about how we actually measure that, how we use the measurements to learn and adapt, how we visualise this, how we make it look, who will review the data, when will it be reviewed, who's going to be part of it, who's going to sign off on changes, that sort of thing. So that's the smaller loops that you go through, and much quicker and more regular. And then the last part of thinking about learning and improvement is thinking about the larger cycles or the longer cycles, which is more where the evaluation happens. So the evaluation and planning, and you think about how and when you'll bring the evidence to answer your key evaluation questions, who will make judgments about the recommendations, who needs to agree on the recommendations, and how will this lead to adaptation and replanning. So that's my slides. I'm not sure if I talk for too long then, Keifer, but I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. Okay. a lot to take in, but hopefully because of the work that you've done in the previous week, some of that made sense.
Sure. Thanks, Karina. Does anyone have any questions before we move ahead to our next activity? Feel free to either unmute yourself or type in the chat. No, I think I might take that silence as a no. We'll always come back to this session anyway, so if you do have any other questions later on, feel free to ask. For the time being, we're going to go into breakout groups for the final time. So you're going to be in pairs, and once again we have the Google slide link. Oh, there we go. A question from Alison. Who should be the right people to be selected to make judgments?
Okay, that is a good question, and I think that goes back to thinking about, remember we did the week and we looked at the styles of evaluation. I forget what it's called, the forms of evaluation. Kasia, help me.
Yeah, the different forms of evaluation.
Yeah, the different forms, and we think about whether we're looking for a judgment type evaluation or we're looking for a collaborative type evaluation. So you need to think about the form that you're working towards. And if you are looking for something that is considered very independent and not influenced by the program, then you're likely to want to have the judgments made by an independent process and an independent person, and not involve the stakeholders a lot in that process. But if you're doing a bit more participatory approaches, and you've decided that the change is going to happen within the group if the group has an involvement in the process, you can develop up rubrics. You can do a joint kind of like development of rubrics, and you can get your team or your stakeholders or your management involved in helping you to make that judgment. So you still have something to base the judgment on. That's sort of seen as an external thing. It's a bit more, it's a bit more independent. But then you could involve, the local stakeholders or your project team in the process. I think it really comes down to what you want to get out of the MEL. And if you want to get the MEL to be used, and you wanted to and sort of like foster change and be positive change in your community, then I sort of lean towards involving the team and key stakeholders like that. But it does depend on who the audience is and the style of evaluation that you're doing.
Thanks, Karina. And one more question in the chat was, I think, in relation to your last slide. So how do you move from collaboration to ownership? What strategies help with that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really tricky thing to do, move from collaboration to complete ownership, because you actually have to give up it's about power. And you have to be willing to give up your power, because you won't be having you'd actually be having less of a say in the outcomes of the MEL or the program even than you would if you were collaborating. So if you're collaborating, you're sort of working on a more equal footing. But if you're handing this over to ownership, you've got to be willing to let go of your power. And it can feel quite chaotic and very not very comfortable, for not often the way we work. And in most cases, when this is the case, when it is community-led, it starts at being community-led. So it starts from the grassroots up, and then the evaluators or the MEL people or people who come as thinking evaluatively come as an additional part and become driven by the people who are implementing, who are the community. So yeah, it's not easy, and it's not necessarily that you would move from one to the other. You might start with the community-led, you might start with a collaboration, you might start with more involvement, or you might start with informing. It might be different for different stakeholders.
Thank you. Thanks, Karina. As I mentioned, we will come back to plenary, so if anyone has any other extra questions on that, feel free to ask then. In the meantime, I have dropped the link into the Google Slides doc into the chat box. So you'll be broken up in pairs and you'll be in your groups for about 10 minutes. And we're wanting you to reflect more about MEL in your own organisation. So we have 3 questions around what are the constraints for engagement in MEL in your organisation? And I know that a couple of you have already posted on the discussion boards for that as well. What are the enablers for engagement of MEL in your organisation? But then we're also wanting to know, and feel free to ask the other person in your group, what strategies do you think you could use to maximise MEL in your organisation? So having a bit of a think of the different ways that you could do that, depending on your position in the organisation, depending on what you're working on, and different things like that as well. What can you do in your role to be able to maximise MEL? So as I mentioned, we'll be in the groups for 10 minutes. I will let you know when there's 5 minutes to go and 2 minutes to go. And then we'll come back and have a final debrief and chat. All right, I will open up the breakout groups and see you soon.
Okay. And then
sorry, Ali, I think you're, if you're able to mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Just remember to mute yourself when you come back into the group. So thank you, everyone. It looks like you were coming through with some different suggestions, but also looked like you had some good conversations in your group. Does anyone want to feel free to unmute yourself? Have any reflections from that? Maybe, someone suggested a really good strategy to maximize engagement in MEL in your organization, something that you think that you're going to take away and try and implement in your organization? I'll look for 2 volunteers.
yeah, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think when I see the MEL that we learn from this course is quite different from what we know in our organizations. So, and if we try to introduce right away throughout our organization, that's also very difficult. Mm-hmm. I can only think of my own projects and also a program, because I'm coordinating a program. Then I can try some of the tools and the skills at that level. And then if many people feel that's a good thing, then of course I can take it to a side program like we have at the director level, where multiple programs are managed. I can influence those people because they are my colleagues. Then of course, if many people still feel it's okay to introduce MEL, and then we can take it up to organizational level, because we have already the unit in the institution, but the problem is not working in the way we are learning here. Mm. So I see hierarchical approach to introduce it and engage people step by step. That's the only feasible way I can think of. Otherwise, it's going to be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. People think it's so costly, and also it's so trying to engage people when actually you're not working. So that's my feeling, actually, how to introduce it. Thank you.
That's excellent, Ali. I think that I was just talking with Keisha, and we can't think of any organisation that we would say is doing brilliantly with implementing MEL. So every organisation has its limitations. We might have the senior management all on board and then, not the skills, or we might have the skills and then not the senior management. And so I think it's great that you work out what you can influence. So you can't influence everything. So you identify the bit that you can influence, not be too disheartened by trying to extend yourself too much saying that you're going to change the whole organisation, but I think seeing it as a slow process, a step-by-step process, working on it, being a champion for MEL in your organisation, doing it really well, and the results of the process will start to, you know, the ripple effect will start to influence others. So, yeah, I think that sounds great. That sounds really good. And, you can even do things like Kasia and I were saying, you could start up a community of practice of other people who are doing MEL and doing it in a similar way, so that you can start to build your confidence and also share lessons learnt in the process. You could write a paper and present a paper on doing MEL in your organisation or your project. So just any little thing, I think, is excellent. That's really all you can do, and it's just good to have a go. Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment on some of the strategies that you discussed in your group? Did I see someone unmute? Maybe not. I'm not sure. All right. Well, actually, that's probably a good way to do the next activity. Because this is the last virtual session and we've got about 10 minutes to go, we wanted to use this opportunity for you to have a quick reflection on the last 16 weeks of learning, which seems like a whole lot. So thinking back to when we started back in February. And we wanted to know what your one key takeaway is of this whole MEL course. If there's one thing that you would like to try in your organisation, or one thing that has really stuck out in terms of your learning that you think that you're going to carry on with, we really would like to hear from you. So what we're going to do, I think we've done this activity before, we're going to do a chat slam. So if everyone could type in their response into the chat box, but don't press send just yet. I will let you know when to press send. But we want to know what your one key takeaway would be. Is it around something to do with the theory of change in the measurement framework, or the scope and developing your key evaluation questions and then choosing your methods, how to weave and analyze the data, or is it more on that reporting and visualization and learning component? What's one thing that we might have mentioned in these sessions, or that you've learnt on the learning management system that you will take away in this course? Okay. So if you're still typing, feel free to keep on typing, but in 3, 2, 1, if you want to hit send onto the chat box, that'd be really great. I think we've got people still typing.
Just checking that. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Here we go. They're coming through. It seems that the theory of change is something that people are taking away, and making sure that the people in the room developing the theory of change, for sure. And learning as you go, and always checking in that you're doing the right thing. It's a good point.
We'll see developing key questions that are weaving report writing.
Yeah, keeping records, that's right, that you can use as data. and how to visualize as well, visualizing your reports, not just having a really long evaluation report, something that we learned from Jen. Great. Sure. Does anybody want to maybe unmute themselves and talk about some of their key takeaways or something that they, that they really enjoyed learning about in the course?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, I think my reflection about these courses, actually, we try to do our things, in our own way, but we didn't have much time to reflect back whether we know are we doing the right thing. This thing actually missing in my work. I do research, but I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing sometimes. So that's an important issue for me, especially the theory of change. Many people talk about it, but I don't know what exactly it was. But now it's very clear. And also, I didn't know that I should collect data purposively to evaluate my projects. But I do collect data for other research purposes, not for internal purposes. And that's also another thing. And also, I was more inclined to quantitative analysis and methodology and disregard qualitative methods. But now I can see that, a more picture coming from both the data and from the story. That's also very important. The other issue is, if I'm not taking much time, about learning. Learning is being missed in many organizations. There is little time to learn. Once you graduate, you're not going to learn. So the learning component of this MEL is really, really very important for me. There are so many things actually that struck me, but I will give others a chance. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. It sounds like you've taken away a lot from the course, so I'm glad that you have learnt a lot from it. Anybody else want to share their reflections? Was that you, Alison, that you'd like to share?
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this course it's good for me. I haven't heard about theory of change before. This is the first time I've heard about it, and I learned about theory of change. I've learned a lot from this course, right from the beginning to the end. Developing key questions is one of the things I really like about the course, because it's giving me going for the right question than just putting the whole lot of questions about a particular program or project. And also data weaving, especially with quantitative stories and figures coming together. That's the thing that I learned in this course that I didn't know before. I used to think about quantitative data as the most used ones, but now I learned that there is no stories without figures. There is no figures without stories. I think I give that chance to others. Thank you for the course.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alison. They're really great reflections. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think also, Suchi, you've put in the chat, it's a really nice summary of MEL is not only about technical administrative things, it's a holistic approach to optimize project outputs and to design your organization in a sustainable cycle. I think that's a really well-rounded way to think of MEL, of feeding it in and incorporating it into the different things. It's not just a standalone piece in your organization, for sure. And I think, one of the things that we do talk about in this course, we talk about a lot of different things, obviously, but it's like a really big, large menu of all of these different, we're whetting your appetite in certain elements, and you can either deep dive, people spend years and years of their life learning about theory of change, but we covered it in 3 weeks, for instance. Or there might be some things that, you'll take away more than others in the course as well, and knowing what is relevant in your organization. And it sounds to, from your feedback that, it's around the learning element, but as well as the theory of change element as well, that are those things that you can really take away.
Yeah, that's great, Keisha. I think I'll just add to that in that, we over the 16-week course, we basically covered everything that you might do in a 3-year university course. So, and we often reach this point with groups, and the pennies there's so many pennies have dropped. And if we often also get 1 or 2 people that absolutely this course changes their lives, because some of the concepts that you've learnt. So, and they might go off and become a consultant, or become a champion in your organisation, whatever it is. And doesn't have to have changed your life, but it, I'm sure, changes a little bit. Yeah. And I was actually one of the people that this course changed my life, and that was 15 years ago. And I've been doing working in the MEL space since then. And yeah, so it's a pretty powerful course, and I'm really glad that you've got some takeaways from it. Yeah, it's nice to hear.
Sure. All right, well, we might leave it there. It's a nice way to end things, I think. Just in terms of like last little bits of admin. So the final course assignments are due in 2 weeks. So on the 9th of July. So that's the learning component and the reporting and visualization component of your projects as well, that you've been working with your project groups along the way. I will be monitoring the discussion boards up until then as well. So if anyone has any other questions, either in relation to this course or about, I know that there's a couple of people who have already reached out to us about MEL in their organisations. So always happy to have a chat with you there, either on the discussion boards, or we can organise a session outside of that as well. So just wanted to extend that invite, but otherwise it's been an absolute pleasure going on this journey with you, and looking forward to seeing what's to come, and hopefully we can stay connected. Fantastic. All right, well, I might leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your day or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.